Hi class, welcome to week 9. This little video, the primary purpose is to teach you about the signature assignment which begins this week. And so first, let me highlight chapter 9 content. As you can see, you've got your learning outcomes, you have your content videos. Chapter 9 is tricky because we will be looking at how we harvest energy, right? What is cellular respiration? We've been talking about caloric content of the foods that we eat, right? So the difference between protein, carbohydrates, and fat. But we haven't discussed how we actually turn that into energy. And remember, glucose, our brain and nervous system can use, but that's it. So everything else we convert to ATP. And so this is the chapter that's dedicated to doing that. So even though it seems short, it's dense, and you actually really need to understand it because chapter 9 sets the stage for us talking about weight loss and diet, which is the next chapter, and then particularly sport. I love the tie-in with sport because sport is the only time we really manipulate how these systems work. And so outside of disease. And so here you have some additional videos. I highly recommend watching all of them as they will prove very fruitful in understanding the material. And again, you have a PowerPoint to go with those as always. And so the other thing you have is you have this little test you can do. I don't have Adobe set up right now on my screen, but you'll have it set up on yours, and you can play with taking little tests and kind of going through these little videos, which is actually pretty nice. It's not required, it's just a little helpful thing for you. And then what you have here is you have the first step in our diet analysis. And so I'm actually going to take you to our signature assignment button and all of that information, and we will go from there. So as you can see, we have a new button right here that just appeared for you called the signature assignment. So let's click on this. This is laid out in the steps with which you will complete this assignment. If you look in your course schedule, you will see that you have steps laid out until the end of the semester. So your project begins right now. I will be grading the steps along the way. And so the very first thing I want you to do is go right here. You'll notice this is not a submission portal. This is only the outline of the entire assignment. This is actually pretty important because if you just look at the steps, you might not see how it entirely ties in, and therefore you might end up dropping the ball. A lot of the reason why this is set up in steps is so you can maximize the amount of points that you can get and that you can do this effectively. So here this is open for you. Let's go back up to the top. First thing to point out, this is worth 20% of your grade. So blowing any part of this is really going to set you back significantly as far as being successful in this course. Keep that in mind. What you will be doing is you'll be choosing 2 to 3 nutrition recommendations. Now, that's not smoking, that's not drinking water, which is a common one. People are like, I'm going to work on drinking water. Well, that's awesome. Drink some water, but let's actually work on some stuff. So you're going to pick 2 or 3 recommendations, and what you can do is include exercise as one of them. And so if you include exercise, you want 2 additional recommendations because moving your body and activity is, to me, as important as nutrition. And you are going to follow them consecutively for 1 week. You are going to record everything in your diet analysis program that you've been using the whole time. You're going to give me your reports at the end, and we're going to do all daily reports just like you've done before. What you are doing is you are meeting the recommendations that you have outlined. Okay, and so I will not be looking at whether you did my plate or anything like that. What I'll be looking at is, did you set out to complete what you said you were going to complete? The other piece of this has to be research-driven choices. So if you decide that you're going to quit eating carbohydrates because you think that they make you fat, well, you're going to need to find research articles that actually support that assertion. Okay, so make sure that you are not following quackery. This is not the time for this. You're not picking a diet to follow necessarily. Now, what many students do is many students will choose like the Mediterranean diet because it's helpful to lower sugar, reduce saturated fat intake, increase fish, increase fruits and vegetables, and so on. Now, if you pick something like the Mediterranean diet, you might only have one recommendation because you're going to talk about all those pieces that you're going to find. But for you, maybe it really is looking at no sugar and adding vegetables. So that's why the real purpose of this is for you to pick something that's meaningful to you. Here are the steps. The very first thing that you're doing this week is this first step. This is exactly what I want to see in your journal. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay? So right now what you're doing is you're identifying a problem. And nutrition is how you're going to address that problem. That problem is going to be different for all of you. It also does not have to be a dramatic problem. I kind of made something a little dramatic here as an example, but your problem really could be you don't feel good in your own skin, and when you eat these types of foods, it lowers your self-esteem. That's a problem, because if you don't feel good about yourself, that doesn't work in life, right? And so this is what you're focusing on. This is the research portion. You don't have to actually do the research yet. That comes when you actually write the paper. But if you're not thinking about them both, it'll make getting to the paper really hard. Okay? And so you really want to be thinking about what that problem is that you have, and then the recommendations that you're going to follow to solve that problem. You want to also make those connections, right? So we know that a low sodium diet would reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. We know that eating a plant-based diet reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease because what is driven by cardiovascular disease? High sugar, high saturated fat, processed foods, right? And so on. So this is what I'll be looking for in your journal. Now, when I grade your journal, do not just look at the score. I might give you 10 out of 10, but if I give you feedback, this is your chance. Because again, your next step is to write this paper. If you have not taken my feedback, which has happened to many, many students, they didn't really read my recommendations, or they had a recommendation of just drinking water. And then they wrote a paper on just drinking water, never having looking back at me saying, that's not good enough. That's awesome, you want to drink some water. You need 2 more recommendations at minimum to meet the standard. And then they end up failing the paper because they never read my feedback. And I gave them full credit on the journal because they did what they were supposed to do. They just needed correction. Okay, so please, please read all of my feedback. Because again, 20% of your grade, the reason it's in steps is so you can make sure you were on track the whole time. That is my goal for you. I will talk a little bit about each one of these steps as we go, but kind of to give you the overview, focusing now on the journal. This will move into a paper that you will write, that you will support with peer-reviewed references. After that, you are going to come up with a very explicit action plan. You are going to share your action plan with your group. You're going to get feedback from me on your action plan. You will get feedback from your group on your action plan. Your action plan has to be completed prior to beginning the 7 days. Okay? You'll write a paper on that, and then at the end of this, you'll write a final paper and a final report. As you can see, it's outlined right here. Okay, and as I said, as we get closer to these steps, I'll talk about them again with you, just like I did with the journal. And so you don't have to make sure you understand everything now. I just want you to read through this and kind of get a sense of what this whole project looks like, as it will save you a significant amount of time. Okay, the other thing is, as you can see here, you will always go to the signature assignment button for your signature assignment work. It is not in your folders, but what I will always do to make sure to help keep you on track, since I've always said you can find everything in your folder, is I'll always put a little sign here saying, hey, don't forget, you have this due. Go up here to the left-hand side and go to your signature assignment. Okay? I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you enjoy the chapter. It's actually one of my favorite chapters because I think the human physiology of it is just super cool. And then really looking at like why does a calorie count and where a calorie comes from and why that counts is really interesting given the fact we just, watched Fed Up, for example. And it talked about a calorie not being a calorie. So what does that mean metabolically? Well, now we're going to learn what that means metabolically. And hopefully you're inspired now to say, what do I want to do different in my own diet? All right. Have a great week and let me know if you have questions.